by Arthur to put together a talk about exercises to support us back into ringing. So I'm not, and I have to put this disclaimer in now, I'm not going to do the full Joe Wicks. You know, I've had people emailing me saying, you know, what should I be wearing? Should I be getting my lycra out, my sweatbands and things? But no, we're not going to be doing the full Joe Wicks. And I didn't really know what to talk about, because all the talks of the Guild here have been about, you know, history of ringing and how to call difficult compositions, lots of long lengths, you know, women's in ringing, all that sort of stuff, different towers. So I thought, well, the easiest thing to do to help manage expectations is to ask people what they would like me to do as a talk. So I put out an email to some of the ringers in around Warwickshire and said, what would you like me to talk about? What would you like me to say? And I got a big sort of fat non-response. So I thought, okay, well, in that case, you'll get what you're given. I did have a few comments, and I thought, well, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll pick up on those comments and I'll do a talk about each of those. One was about sort of physical aspects of returning to ringing. One was about the cognitive aspects of returning to ringing, and one was about the emotional effects. So I've done a little, I've pre-recorded it, and I'll put the recording on, and then I'll come back and do a live little Q&A session in between each one. So if you can have a think about what questions you might be wanting to ask me, feel free. What I have done during these recorded talks is I have taken some pictures from the internet, and on these pictures I have put a few captions. Now, as with anybody nowadays, I have to put this disclaimer in to say that the captions are there to illustrate a point and are not in any way, size, shape or form meant to be sort of derogatory or insulting or anything like that. They're supposed to be just illustrating a point. However, obviously, if there is a problem with any of them, just let us know and we will remove these captions from these talks. In the first talk, I'm going to talk about the physical aspects of returning to ringing. There will be some exercises demonstrated, but please don't try them until we come back to the live action, and then we'll go through them all together. And again, second disclaimer, if you have a heart condition, if you've been told you mustn't exercise, and you feel these might be too much for you, although they are very, very gentle, please go at the pace that you need to be at. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to look at, first of all, the physical aspects of returning to ringing after a long layoff. So I'm going to share the screen and the video and all sorts of things, and hopefully if there's any problems, Claire, just let me know, but I should be able to do this. That's that.
I'll muted, I take it.
Yeah. Okay, can you see that? Just a blank screen at the moment. Exercises to support us back into ringing. The first comment I had was about physical issues. I'm worried I won't be able to get up the stairs again. Now, most towers, unless on the ground floor, will have spiral stairs with anything from 1 or 2 to, over 100. And unless you have a spiral staircase in your house, this is something you will not have been able to practice since the last time you went ringing. The fear here is perhaps that your physical abilities will not be as they were. Your legs will not be strong enough, your shoulders will have seized up, and perhaps your balance needed for standing for any length of time will not be good enough. Now, I could just suggest that we only visit towers where there's a ground floor ring, but I think we can probably do a bit better than that. First of all, I had to think about what exercise bell ringing actually gives us. How fit and strong do we actually need to be? If you look around at ringers who ring long lengths or many peals, what sort of physique do they have? Are they all sort of super fit and hunky? Well, maybe in their dreams. Is the ringing world full of training programs on how to build protein and muscle and stamina? Not really. Bell ringing is not going to get us fit in terms of aerobic capacity or strength. When you think of somebody making their New Year's resolution, do they think, hey, I want to get fit this year? I know, must go bell ringing. So we know it cannot be heavy, strenuous physical exercise. Otherwise, it would be impossible for children to do. It would be impossible for older adults to do. It's more of a technical activity. Otherwise, it would be unsuitable for most of us. It's gentle physical and mental workout suitable for all ages, sizes, and shapes. But what can happen, though, if we don't do something regularly, is that we reduce our exercise tolerance. This is what I think of as more your typical bell ringing community. Older, shorter, smaller, weaker, stronger, larger, smaller, etc., etc. So I had to think about what form of exercise ringing actually gives us and how we can help ourselves so that when the day comes and we can return to our ropes, we're not too stiff and feeble to do so. To me, the physical demands that ringing requires are these. First of all, you need lower limb strength for climbing stairs, checking bells, climbing ladders, crouching under bells, etc. Then you need your balance for uneven paths, floors, hazards, and again, climbing stairs. You also need shoulder flexibility. A quarter peel, you're going up and down 1,000 times plus. A peel 5,000 times plus. Even Sunday service ringing, you're going to be moving your shoulders 100 plus times every time. So I've put together a couple of suggestions for each of these. Now, all exercises can be done standing up or sitting, because I found in my experience that any exercise that involves you clearing the space on the floor and getting down there is usually just not done. So I will explain the exercise first and then we'll have a go. The simplest exercise to improve lower limb strength is just a simple sit to stand. Sit to stand is actually harder than climbing stairs in that your joints have to move through a greater range of movement. So find a dining room chair or one of similar height and firmness and complete as many sit to stands as you can in 20 seconds. Then to progress this, you can either aim to beat your score or you can increase your time by increments of 10 seconds until you can do sit to stands for up to a minute. The second exercise is about keeping your balance. So this is me demonstrating with my special physiotherapy socks progressively harder starting positions. So choose the one that suits your ability. The first one and the easiest one is top left, which is standing with your feet apart. And then moving clockwise around, you get progressively harder. Second one is closed foot standing, which is a technical term for feet together. The third one is stride standing, so one foot just in front of the other as if you've just taken a step forwards. And the fourth one is tandem standing, so standing with the heel of one foot in front of the toe of the other foot. Once you have chosen a starting position to suit yourself, you can see here demonstrated stride standing. Just close your eyes and hold it for 10 seconds. What this does is take away our vision. We rely quite heavily on our vision for our balance, so this exercise takes that away and forces our brains to pay attention to the somatosensory information coming from our feet, which is known as proprioception. If you can manage 10 seconds quite easily, you might like to progress this and challenge your balance a little more. So you can do this by making yourself slightly more unstable by raising your hands in front of you. If you can balance with your hands in front of you, then try closing your eyes. This position of standing hands in front with eyes closed is used specifically to see if people have sufficient connections between the sensory nerves of the feet to the brain. It's known as the Romberg Test, and a positive Romberg is when you're unable to maintain your position with your eyes closed. One of the simplest exercises for balance is simply to stand on one leg.
And this is something that you can do when you're waiting for the kettle to boil, whilst you're cleaning your teeth. It doesn't need a lot of space, it doesn't need any equipment, and little bits of practice can help build up from 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, etc. Now let's have a look at shoulder flexibility. These simple exercises will help improve the flexibility of your shoulders. So start with your arms in a W shape, with your hands held palms up as if you were holding something. Your hands should be in line with your shoulders. So sometimes it can help to get your hands in the right position just by standing close to a wall. What this position does is just get your shoulders into some external rotation. So from that position, now straighten your elbows, keeping your wrists as extended as possible and still keeping your hands in line with your shoulders. And after that, bring your hands above your head and see if you can get your palms together and your arms as straight as possible. Another simple exercise is to put one hand over your shoulder behind your back and reach around and grab it with the other hand. Remembering, of course, to do it both ways, and you will probably find that you have one shoulder that is more flexible than the other. If you can't actually physically reach your hands, you might like to use a towel or a tea towel in order to get that extra stretch. Remembering, of course, that there is no substitute for the real thing. So when we do get back to ringing, be prepared for some aches, pains, and a little bit of joint stiffness before we get fully flexible.
So that's the first little bit about physical return to ringing. So I thought, you know, as a physio, we all sit on our bottoms and watch far too much TV and too much Zoom. I'm going to get you to do a little bit of moving. So you're all sitting on your chairs. So we're going to start with a sit to stand. Can you hear me? I've got the right noise on. Yeah, good, right. So first of all, then we're just going to do a simple sit to stand. So I'm going to move towards the back of the room. You've got your sit down, and we're just going to do as many as you can in 20 seconds. 20 seconds is quite a long time. Okay, are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. And stop. I can hear John above me doing his exercises as he should be. So a simple sit to stand like that, you can do during your normal life. You know, you can, just practice standing up, sitting down. And actually standing up and sitting down is harder work than climbing stairs. So it should get your quads going a little bit. As I said, any exercise that that involves sort of clearing a big space and lying down and getting your right kit on doesn't get done. So just a simple sit to stand is quite good. And then you can either progress that by trying to beat how many you did. And if anyone remembered how many they actually did, no? Keep a record of it, and then you can try and beat that. Or you can build up the time, so you can go from sort of 20 seconds to 30 seconds and so on, so you can do about a minute.
So I just managed 17.
17? Rubbish. Okay, so after the sort of the legs, we were going to have a look at balance. So you get your up on your feet again and choose whatever starting position you feel comfortable in. Could be feet apart, could be feet together, one foot in front, or tandem standing. Now we don't think about, oh sorry, I'm going to come back and forth. We don't think too much about balance when we're ringing, but what we tend to do is I'm not saying everyone's old, but ringers are tending to get older, is that we stop listening to our feet and we tend to rely very much on our eyes for our balance. So this is a test, it's called the Romberg Test, and it actually checks to see whether your brain can think about your balance using your feet. So if you have got some balance problems, make sure you've got something that you can be close to so you can hold on to it. So get your feet in the starting position of your choice. I can't demonstrate because here's my foot here. So feet apart, feet together, stride or tandem. Hand out in front. And then close your eyes for 10 seconds. You ready? I have to keep my eyes open because I can't see my watch. So go. And open again. So if you felt you wobbled a bit, that might be something you need to practice. It's just making sure that you can listen to the balance sort of information coming up from your feet. Okay. Standing on one leg. Now this is something that ladies of a certain age have always said they can never do. So we're just going to stand on one leg for 15 seconds. So you're up. Make sure you see that my leg is actually up in the air. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. 5. That's 10. That's 15. So again, this is something, a very simple exercise that you can do without waiting for the kettle to boil, cleaning your teeth, just to get that little bit of practice up. Okay, so that's on feet and balance, and then shoulders. Having a look. First one is this W shape. So you're a bit Egyptian here with the old carrying something on one hand. So that's your W shape. And that gets your shoulders into some external rotation, because we sit at a computer, we sit with rounded shoulders and hunched backs. So this just gets your shoulders back up that way. Elbows forwards, shoulders back. Then keeping the hand extended, straighten your arm. So you want, if I can get the shot, you want your arm as straight as possible, like that. You probably feel a bit uncomfortable. Yeah, if you really want a good stretch, just check I can get it, put it onto the wall. Can't quite see there. Let's try that wall there. So that really good stretch there. And from there, take it right up above your head. Does I need to be further back, slightly further back, right up above your head, so you can get your hands absolutely straight, palms together. If you're really clever, you can do it that way as well. Now, remembering the exercises I've just shown you are just very simple ones that you can do every day without, thinking too much about them. But there's no substitute, because when we go back to ringing, you're going to be doing this arm up, down for 100 times. So don't expect, just to go straight back. Oh, let's ring a peal of celebration. Let's, you'll find that your arms will ache. Okay, so yes, I'm not sure if I say this in the talk, but I think, if you were a marathon runner and you were used to training, and then suddenly you stopped for a year, you wouldn't then go back to running at the same speed, the same distance as you did before. We may have to build up more gradually. Okay, I'm going to go back now, and we're going to have a look at the cognitive issues. Actually, shall I do a bit of Q&A? If anyone's got any Q&A there?
Yeah, Lucy, I've just unmuted myself because there are a few little. Well, there's one question in the chat box. There's been a few great Umanis. I've done 17. I love that one. We'll be taking it on. But there is a question which I'm not sure whether this came from the arm exercises or wedge exercise, but it was. From Simon Ridley saying, are loud cracking noises healthy? Oh. So I don't know whether you'd like to take that question.
Yes. Shall I go back to my disclaimer about,
Yeah. And another one that's just come through to say, Jane Morris asks if there are any exercises for carpal tunnel. Well, I guess we might get lots of requests for specific.
We could do a clinic at the end of the session. I'm more than happy to sort of talk about, carpal tunnel syndrome or frozen shoulder or, brachial plexus, anything that you fancy talking about. But if we go through the talk and then those people who are not interested so much can disappear and people who are interested can stay on. Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
so I think I'll let you carry on.
Right. Okay, so I'll go back to sharing my screen.
I think I will have forgotten what to do. This was the next issue raised. So, will we have actually forgotten how to ring? We have an amazing and long-lasting memory for skills that is often known as muscle memory. But muscle memory is a bit of a misnomer because it's not really a memory, it's more a set of practice motor movements that have become learnt and can be recalled when required. So the official terms for this are motor learning and skill acquisition. Now, it is quite helpful to know how we acquire this so-called muscle memory by thinking about how we learn something new. Now, normally when we think of memory, we think of being able to remember what happened yesterday or what happened last week. And this is known as episodic memory. Or we can think of memory as being able to remember facts, which is always helpful for quiz nights and for remembering things like methods. And this is known as declarative memory. Now, these memories are mainly produced and stored in the temporal lobes or the hippocampus, which is deeper inside the brain. The other type of memory we have is the memory for skills, and this is known as procedural memory. Now, we need procedural memory in order to actually do the physical task of ringing, and we need the declarative memory to remember things like methods. Now, ringing involves a complex sequence of muscle movements, and when we're first learning to ring, as with any skill, we don't have this memory laid down, and we have to build it up. So initially, we have to use our declarative memory, which is known as the cognitive stage of learning, and it's characterized by frequent errors, a variety of muscle movements, and it's the stage when the learner has to think a lot about the skill and how to execute it. But with more practice and continued practice, that sequence of muscle movements required to ring gets moved into the procedural memory, and it can be then performed more automatically and without conscious thought. And this leaves your conscious memory with capacity for other things, such as learning and remembering methods. There is a large range of brain areas which are responsible for skill memories, including areas in the motor cortex. This is the part of the brain which sends the signals to the muscles of the body, and it's also responsible for planning and executing the movements. The basal ganglia, which is a structure deep inside the brain, and that's associated with movement initiation, starting things. and the cerebellum, which is an area at the back of the brain that deals with adaptation. So say you were ringing and the rope didn't come down exactly where you were expecting it to. The cerebellum would be able to adjust your motor movements in order to be able to catch it. Now, when we are laying down procedural memory, the brain structure actually physically changes. So when you are learning a skill, what happens is that the connections between the different areas of the brain increase. And even after a relatively short amount of time, if you had an MRI scan of your brain, they'd be able to detect new connections being made by the white matter. The white matter are the long fibres that connect the different parts of the brain together. And it's not just the white matter, the long connections between the brain that change with training. There are also changes to the grey matter as well. Now, grey matter is made up of the brain cell bodies known as neurons, and this is where information processing in the brain occurs. So training increases the grey matter in the parts of the brain that are involved in the processing of information, so that allows it to become processed more quickly and more accurately. Learning of new skills also results in changes in the primary motor cortex, which is the area of the brain responsible for actually causing the actions. So signals from the brain travel down the spinal cord and cause the muscles to move in the coordinated way. So you can see that the processes that are important for learning and memory of new skills occur mainly in the brain and not in the muscles. And those changes that occur in the brain during skill learning and memory actually alter the information that the brain sends out to the muscles, thereby changing the movements that are produced. So you can see that changes in the white matter, which are the connections, the grey matter, which is the actual cell body of the brain, and in the motor cortex representation are all very important for skill learning and memory. Now, these changes happen fast. It's known as neuroplasticity, and it starts straight away. You only need to do a few repetitions of a new skill before these connections start to be laid down. It is therefore very important to make sure that these pathways are laid down accurately. And so here is where I put forward my support for the art training program for bell ringing. As you probably know, it was devised initially by a physiotherapist, and I'm very pleased to see that the Central Council also support it. If you cannot control your bell, you'll never be able to ring anything other than badly. So it is vitally important that these physical connections in the brain are laid down accurately right from the start. So the way to teach a motor skill is to take the complex task, such as bell ringing, and you break it down into much smaller component parts. You then teach these small parts, so the simple connections get made, and then they are built up with other parts of the task until you have the complete full action. Our declarative memory has a finite capacity for attention. So if you start to move your learner on too soon, whilst they're still needing to consciously think about the physical aspects of ringing a bell, something is going to have to go. This is known as dual task interference, in that whatever the learner has been told to pay attention to is going to take precedence. So don't be surprised if your learner forgets what they were practicing you were telling them earlier, if they are now being asked to concentrate on something different. It is hugely important when breaking down a task such as ringing, which is a cyclical movement, into its component parts, that when you put them back together, they actually form the full movement. Therefore, the end position of the first part task must be the starting position of the second part task. So say, for example, you were teaching somebody hand stroke, and the first part is just pull off the sally and let go. If you teach them to pull off the sally, and as soon as your hands come off the sally, you put them down by your side. This means that the end position is hands down by your side. You now want to progress this to hands off the sally and onto the tail end. But the learner's brain has started to make the connection that the hands off sally means hands separate, whereas actually what you want is hands off sally, keep together. So be very careful about how you break down the task and check that the end of one is the beginning of the second. Once your brain has laid down these pathways, it becomes the norm and it starts to feel right to the person. So if taught incorrectly, it is these incorrect movements that become established, and it's then very hard to make even a minor change. How long does it take to lay down these new pathways? Well, if you have one lesson, they will have started to form, but unless you follow this up with a second lesson and a third lesson, then those connections will be lost. After a few hundred repetitions, the pathway is beginning to be laid down more firmly, but it takes about 10,000 repetitions for something to become hardwired. So say you see a ringer with an incorrect movement pattern and you ask them to make a change, which they do, but then as soon as you put them into rounds, they revert back to their original poor handling. Well, this is because the declarative memory doesn't have sufficient attentional capacity to concentrate on the rounds as well as the alteration in the movement pattern that they're trying to make in their physical handling. So their attention is on keeping the bell in the right place or ringing at the right speed. So therefore they will revert back to their established learnt movement pattern. So what does this mean when teaching learners? It means we need to allow them time to repeat and repeat and repeat, but repeat accurately so that it becomes that established movement pattern and is moved into the procedural memory where they no longer have to think about it. We are too quick in many cases to move people on to rounds and chord changes without making sure that the physical aspects of ringing are well established and well established properly. Now this is going to be at different rates for different people, so you need to work at the speed of the learner and not the need of the band. Let's have a demonstration now at how an established movement memory will take precedence over a novel movement. So just fold your arms. This is going to be in your procedural memory and a very well established movement pattern. You can do this without thinking. Now fold your arms the wrong way, a different way to the way you would normally. And perhaps with a bit of thought you can do this, but it needs to come now from your conscious memory and it will feel a little bit odd. So now as a teacher I can say, well, I've taught you how to fold your arms the way I want you to fold your arms, which is different to the way you normally do it. So therefore I'm going to ask you to do this all the time in future. So let's see if that works. And just let's see how well John did when I asked him to do this.
Okay, you know what's coming next then? I'm going to get you to be doing this. So have you had a bit of a practice? Let me just change the angle so you can see my folded arms. So if we're talking about procedural memory and do I need to stop the slideshow or stop sharing? No, that's fine. Everything all right? Yep, good. Do worry about it. I'm not so used to Zoom. I do MS Teams. So let's think about you teaching a learner or as a learner. So this is your normal arms folded position, and you think actually, you know, if this is your hand stroke, it's not quite as I want it. I want you to be doing it this way round. How easy is it for you to change? Very easy? Not so easy. I think Tracy's having a bit of trouble there. Okay, so I'm your teacher and I'm thinking, right, I want you to do it differently. I want you to do it the way you don't normally do it. So that's your normal way. That's the non-normal way. You're going to do it this way all the time from now on. And I've now taught you and I've had a lesson and you've done it. Good, right. You've now learned it. Now I'm going to bring in something extra. So what we tend to then do is, right, okay, now you're going to do it properly and you're going to be bringing a method as well. So I'm just going to ask you to do some counting, not ringing counting, just normal counting, but it's a little odd. So I'm going to get you to count upwards in threes, but instead of doing it from 0, instead of going 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, etc., I'm going to get you to start from 2. So you'll be doing 2, 5, 8, 11, 14, 17. So just counting out loud while you're doing this. So the same as John, I'd like you to hands on your knees, fold your arms, hand on your knees, fold your arms, hand on your knees, fold your arms. So this is like you're ringing, hand stroke, backstroke, hand stroke, backstroke. But you're going to be doing the hand stroke the wrong way. So whichever way you normally fold your arms, you're going to be doing it the opposite way. Okay, so let's just do 5 of those. So you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's your 10 hand stroke backstrokes. Now I'm going to get you to do some counting. So it's counting upwards from 2, going upwards in threes. Okay, are you ready? So 2, 5, 8, 11, 14, and I can't actually remember which way my arms are going now. So I don't know how you're getting on. It's always easy. You might revert back to your normal way.
I'm okay with the counting.
You're all right with the counting, are you?
I'm not even sure which way around I turn my arms now.
Well, next time you fold your arms without thinking, that's the way you normally do it. And then you think, oh, okay. So yes, what I'm basically saying is for anybody who is being taught or who is learning or teaching, you need to make sure that the physical aspect of ringing is very, very well established before you start going into other things, bringing in other information. Yeah. Right. Okay. So the final bit of the talk. Has anyone got any questions on that sort of? Or are you going to be practicing it the next?
This is an opportunity for people to put questions. There's a few comments about how people have done, and they range from not very well or terrible to average. So I think obviously people did find that one quite hard. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Now is the time to ask them before we move on. Just give people a few seconds to type. There doesn't seem to be anything else coming into. I think that you've probably fried everybody's brain for trying to do it.
Right. So the final one is it's sort of about the emotional aspects. So let's see if I can share again.
Just a thought. As learning methods and learning the physical aspect of ringing require different parts of the brain, they are not interdependent. So perhaps, rather than the traditional learning to physically ring before learning methods, perhaps we could teach new learners to learn methods before teaching them the physical aspect of ringing, or at least alongside it. I think we have to have a look post-COVID at how we teach our new recruits. Anyway, in answer to the comment that I think I'll have forgotten what to do, if you've been ringing for any length of time, you will not have forgotten the physical aspect of ringing. However, you may have been a bit rusty in your memory of methods and have to do a bit of refreshing. The last comment is the one regarding emotion. I'm worried I won't enjoy it anymore. Now, ringing post-COVID is going to be different, and if you're looking for an excuse to stop, this is a perfect opportunity. However, if we wish to continue, then we will have to make differences and change. So have a think about what it is about ringing that we enjoy. Is it the physical challenge? Is it the mental challenge? Is it the social aspect? You know, the beer afterwards? Perhaps a combination of all three. This circle comes from the Return to Wellness website, which is targeted at getting people back to work after a period of time off following physical or mental poor health. But I think that with a couple of small adjustments, it is actually very valid to our return to ringing. It takes about 6 weeks to form a habit, and as it's over a year now since we've been able to ring, the habit of not going ringing is very firmly ingrained. So this can give us quite a fear of returning. What's it going to be like? Will it be different? Will it have changed? Will I still like it? You hear people talk about when we return to normal, when we return to ringing, when we get back to how we used to be. And I think many people's expectation is that we will all just rock up to the tower, climb those stairs, catch hold, and be ringing peals of celebration. And everything will be just back to how it used to be before. Without being pessimistic, I think the return to ringing is not going to be straightforward at all, and changes will need to be made. But I hope these changes will be for the better. Thinking about our local NHS trust, they made a pledge that they were going to become paper-free by the end of 2020. Now, this work was started 3 years previously, but changes were hugely hard to implement, and hundreds of face-to-face meetings and paper reports and delays were still happening at the beginning of 2020. Then COVID struck, and it forced us all to upskill in the use of Zoom meetings and electronic referrals and non-face-to-face meetings. So with the NHS, the intention is now to continue this and not revert back. And my hope is that the changes we have made during the past year in ringing can also continue to be implemented, with maybe people learning methods on ringing room, more connectivity between areas of the country, and cooperation between remote bands. So how can we return to ringing and be happy to do so? Well, firstly, we have to adjust our expectations, the ones that we have of ourselves. Now, adjusting these expectations requires us to acknowledge the changes that have happened this last year as a result of COVID. And these changes are possibly going to include not being able to ring as well, or remember the methods you used to ring. And if you've had COVID, you may have some post-COVID fatigue. Now, acknowledging these changes may or may not be easy. We may have become less confident in our abilities or worried about life in general. So have a think about what your expectations actually are, and think about the fact that things don't always turn out as you expect. Expectations often come with the word should in front of it. It should be like it was before. I should be able to ring better than this. I should remember how to ring methods. Or my tower captain should help me more. Or my fellow ringers should be more sympathetic. And if our expectations are not met, then we're going to be disappointed. So to help with managing our expectations on our return to ringing, it would be good to just remove the word should and appreciate the here and now. Because it will be different, and we may have to start off with just appreciating the fact that we can return to ringing, and then we can build from there. I've changed this one slightly, because we're not returning following illness unless you've been unfortunate enough to have COVID. But if you've not rung for a year or more, things are going to be a bit different. Your body will feel different. So we need to acknowledge this and don't expect to get back to full ringing straight away. If you were a marathon runner, used to training many miles a week, and then you didn't run for a year, you wouldn't suddenly expect to return to the same level. So acknowledge this and make allowances that it may take some time to get back up to speed. You don't have to go all zen about listening to your body, We know we've not been as fit and active as we were previously, so be kind to yourself and make allowances if your body protests. When we get back to the physical aspect of ringing, it might take a while, so build up your tolerance at a rate you feel comfortable with. You might get some aches and pains, but these will pass. It is an ongoing process. We can stress ourselves out with some worrying thoughts. I won't be able to ring anymore. I'm worried I'll be expected to be as good as I was before, but I'm not sure I can do it. I've no idea what to expect. I've no idea what the rest of the band expect of me, and I certainly don't know what I expect of them. Now, on one hand, you might be worried that you're not good enough anymore. You'll be someone who wants to do the best you can, so you can feel proud of what you do and gain satisfaction from doing it. Returning to ringing and finding you're not at the level you were when you stopped can be quite distressing. Alternatively, you might put the responsibility into the hands of your tower captain and expect them to sort everything out. When you return to ringing and find things not as they were, you can blame the tower captain, which could be distressing for you and probably even more so for the tower captain. These are some of the behaviours that you might notice in yourself or in others that are all signs of stress. Someone feeling anxious, someone getting angry or irritable. You might feel overwhelmed or undermotivated, or have problems with your memory or concentration. Now, mental well-being and mindfulness have been very much to the fore this past year, so we ought to be better nowadays at recognising what we're feeling at any given moment and to decide whether it's worth worrying about or not. Remember that others are in the same boat as you, so do talk to each other and help each other out. I'm not going to go any more about mental well-being now because there's a lot of online help. This final section is about setting boundaries. So again, this is about being honest with yourself by tuning in to how you're feeling about the situation and giving yourself permission to be kind to yourself and understand your limits. Once you've done this, you need to express this to your fellow ringers about any fears that you have, any worries you're thinking about, and any physical problems if you have any. And just don't allow others to push you beyond where you want to go or faster than you want to go. So just to summarise, the return to ringing is not just about the physicality, but it could be emotional as well. So I ask everyone to be kind to yourselves and to others, and don't expect things to be the same. But what we do need to do is embrace these changes, and at the end of the day, keep calm and carry on ringing.
So that's the bit about the emotional aspects of returning to ringing. I think actually in some respects that's almost the hardest because we haven't been ringing for so long. It's going to be a bit worrying. So just wanted to put that in there, that it's physical, it's cognitive and emotional aspects of it. So that's the end of my talk. I am now open to questions.
Yeah.
I have a private clinic if you want to book in for your appointment for your bad knee or your bad neck.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was, I think you've put into words an awful lot of what people are probably feeling and thinking around, and I think it's very poignant that you chose to look at the emotional side of things as well, because that's and you've given equal importance to the physical, cognitive and emotional, and I think you're probably right to do so. There's a lot of people out there who will be stressing about it. Ringers at my tower, I know, are stressing about, oh, will I be able to do this again? You know, it's been such a long layoff. How will I remember to do it? And I think as experienced ringers, those of us who've been ringing for many years, we know that there'll be a lot that you don't forget if you've learned the skills, the motor skills that you have learned and put away in your sort of your long-term memory. They don't go away, and so those will be quite quick to return. But we've got to bear in mind getting over the emotional stress of what's happened to us all. So yeah, that's great. So there are a few questions coming up in the chat box. So we've got lots of thank yous coming in. And let's say somebody, Julie Tarling says, any tips for changing the hardwiring to get hands quickly from the sally to the tail end when that slow motion has been learnt many years previously by being taught hands to sides when just doing backstroke? So the exercise that the teaching exercise that you described. So I guess, yes, we all know, anybody who's taught ringing, we all know that actually it's much harder to unlearn a skill than it is to learn it. And obviously you've put it.
And you will go back to what is hardwired as soon as something else comes in. So you'll be going, right, while I'm concentrating on it, I can do it. While I'm concentrating, I can do it. Now I've got to go and follow him. Oh, right, now it's gone wrong again. You will go back. You need to repeat and repeat. And as I said, doesn't actually get laid down for, we're looking at thousands of repetitions. So really, if you are going to change your hard wiring, you need to just go into that tower and practice and practice and practice without any other distractions until you can start saying, right, I will do it 10 times. And then I will actually start, you can just count up to 10 in your head and see if you revert back to your old ways. But I mean, there are some things in the art program that I think can still be improved upon. What I would love to do is, this is just my own opinion at the moment, my theory is that when people are being taught the tail end, they're taught like this sort of fishing rod hand back, the tail end hold, where I think it needs to be sort of a more of a turned in one. But I don't want us, that's my opinion at the moment. And what I would love to do is video several experienced ringers to see if my theory is right or wrong. Because I do think that a lot of the fishing rod tail end can help push the rope out and not be conducive to sort of hands off and onto the back end. That's a theory that I would love to discuss in more depth at some point.
To remember on a week trip teaching in Ypres that you were already thinking about.
I was already thinking that,
I
yes.
remember being videoed, in fact, for your research.
Yeah, I haven't got any further with it so far, but yeah, I'm still thinking.
I don't mind being a guinea pig again. I've got some more things in the chat box. So Phil Ramsbottom saying it's been excellent, a good presentation. I'm changing one aspect of my teaching routine thanks to this evening. So you're already making a difference.
Oh, blimey.
And Tracy Stevens says, I enjoyed the exercises. I'll definitely start them now, as I can't believe how my muscles feel after doing them briefly this evening. Well, I don't know whether you noticed me disappear out of the side of the screen as I was standing on one leg as I fell over. So Simon Ridley says, picking up on changes, I've decided to embrace the ringing I want to do and ditch the stuff I don't. Pre-COVID, I wasn't enjoying ringing, and I'm hoping that by re-evaluating my ringing, I can return only to the aspects that I enjoy. I'm looking forward to my new ringing life. Has anyone else felt the same? So maybe get some answers to that.
Yeah, and I think we have to be very careful that we mustn't be selfish as much as, be selfish in some respects, but we've got to remember, if we're going to keep ringing as a activity for the future, for the younger generation, we have to start teaching more younger people. So yes, we get our own pleasure from ringing, and you can ring a peal, but you don't want to ring that peal, so you'll only ring this peal because it's nice. But we may have to put something back into ringing for the future generations.
I think there's
spend more time doing some teaching.
I've heard that there's quite a few people who would have been peal ringers before, who definitely decided they're not going to back to as much peal ring. I have got a request from Jane Morris, who wants to be able to ask the question live, I think, which will make it easier for her to explain. So are you happy to answer a question from Jane if I ask her to mute? Okay, so hopefully Jane.
Hiya, thank you. There were just a couple of things it's more about, you know, when you go back to ringing for that first time again. I mean, we briefly last year went to go and check the tower was okay, just a couple of us, and it was weird how we all felt nervous, even the experienced people. It's anything you can recommend to help us relax more, because it was so tense going onto that rope that was aching so much afterwards. And I was on the first bell, I was on the treble.
You know, it's you almost have to pretend that you've not been there before, I think, and say, you know, recognize it's going to be stressful, recognize you are going to be nervous, recognize you haven't done this for a while, but everyone is in the same boat. You're not, you know, returning for ringing after a long layoff. Just for my experience, I learned as a child, and then all through my 20s and 30s, I didn't ring at all until I came back to ringing later on. I hadn't rung for 17 years, and going back up in the tower, I couldn't remember the difference between Stedman and Granser, and I was sort of, hang on, what's the Granser Bob, and you know, all these things, and I'd rung peals of them beforehand. I think it's just recognizing that it is going to feel odd, and don't think, oh hooray, we can go back to ringing, let's ring a peal. Go up and ring, you know, a few rounds, just to realize, you know, oh, it's a bit, you know, my shoulders are a bit achy after this.
My hands are really, really tense, but I do suffer with anxiety anyway. But on the subject of hands, because we've been bored in lockdown, I've been knitting a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so like my thumb and my hand have gone quite stiff, and it feels like beginnings of carpal tunnel. Are there any exercises to do to sort of stop that from happening or improve it?
I mean, carpal tunnel is a very specific condition where you have a band of fascia across your wrist here, because otherwise if your hand came down, all your tendons would stick out. So this sort of band holds them all nicely in place. And if you get some inflammation, if your hands are swollen, that can press on the nerve in there, and you get this sort of tingling in your fingers, and you sort of have to shake it to get the tingling away. And the only real cure for that is to get rid of the swelling, but if it's really a tightened band, you end up with surgery, but you'd need a proper diagnosis for that. What I would think it probably is more likely, if you've been doing knitting, which is small repetitive movements, you know, then not that I can knit, but you know, so it's small repetitive movements with little movements like that, is that your hands just get stuck, and you just need to put the knitting down and really stretch in the opposite direction to give them that long bit of movement. So just, you know, just stop your knitting, good stretch, and then take it up again. It's usually those little small repetitive movements that can cause that stiffness and pain.
Yeah, I was just fearful that it would be too painful for me to ring again. So, and I don't want that to happen.
Well, the only way to do it is to say, all right, I can either be very fearful and it might hurt, so I won't do it, or you can say, right, it might hurt, but it might not. So I'll go up and I'll ring, you know, 10 rings, and then I'll stop. Yeah, that was all right. I can do some more. So it's being kind to yourself and taking it very slowly at your own pace. That would be my advice.
So
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I think a lot of the things that wise words coming through, but a lot of things we already know, I think, or certainly those of us who have taught people, it really is sort of important to go at the pace that somebody can learn. It's no point saying, well, you should, you know, thinking to yourself, well, they should have learnt this after 10 repetitions. If it takes them 20, then that's how long it takes. We have a comment from Julie Tarling again saying videoing ringing is a really good idea. I only realised I was throwing the rope away from me when I got videoed by a non-ringer, and no one had ever mentioned it before, and that completely changed my ringing for the better. So obviously Julie was actually able to correct that handling issue just by having had it videoed. But well done, Julie, for actually having managed to correct a movement that was not ideal in the first place. So I've got a question of my own. I have noticed that since I've not been ringing, that I have noticeable neck and back pain all the time. So I'm hoping that when I go back to ringing, that will all improve once I return to ringing. Obviously, if I'm sensible as I make my return. But it has been quite noticeable that whereas I didn't particularly have neck and back pain before, I do now.
Well, I mean, ringing is one of those things where you stand up, and not only do you stand up, you have to put your arms up, so you're going to get your back into that extended position. Whereas our modus operandi for the last year has been shoulders rounded on a computer, without any sort of thought about, oh, let's go back up there. Whereas ringing, you have to. I mean, I'm sure there are ringers who can ring like this, but most of them are upright, and you stand for a while. Whereas most of the time, activities we do, we tend to sit.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can do some exercises. There's loads on YouTube if you say neck and back exercises, but you don't do them. That's the trouble. Whereas when you go ringing, you're standing in a good position for an hour, whereas you do some exercises, you might do them for 5 minutes or so.
That's a good point.
So yeah, hopefully ringing will actually loosen up your shoulders, loosen up your back.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
So one last question from me. If you had to pick one exercise for people to use before returning to ringing, which one would it be?
No.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I don't actually think that ringing is that much of a physical exercise. It's the repetition. I mean, if you put your hands up and down once, that's not going to do anything. It's because you do several hundreds of repetitions that you might end up with a little bit of a problem with your shoulders. But if you take it gradually, if you do your couch to 5K, but couch to peel ringing, nice and gradually, it's getting your shoulders into external rotation, so up above, and you can either climb stairs, sort of the usual sort of government advice is to do some exercise.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so that's given me an idea. We could market the couch to QP, couldn't we?
Couch to, yeah, definitely get in there.
Definitely. So I'm going to end the recording here. I haven't got any more questions in the chat box. So if anybody has got